near the airport. 8 people were killed during a mass shooting there late Thursday, according to the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department spokesperson Gina Cook. Victims were found dead at the scene, including the gunman believed to have been a suicide. Few other details are available. 4 other people transported in ambulance. One is in critical condition with gunshot wounds. So prayers for that person, the victims, their families. At the same time, Derek Chauvin did not take the stand in his trial in Minneapolis. The defense rested. They have the day off there, and final closing arguments and jury deliberations begin Monday. Protests went on over the death of Daunte Wright in Brooklyn Center. Last night they were peaceful and were not dispersed. It's the 5th night of demonstrations, but it was the first peaceful night. And also the film of Adam Toledo, I think it's pronounced Toledo, it might be Toledo, I haven't heard it pronounced yet, was released yesterday. The Chicago police shooting of a 13-year-old boy. Some are characterizing it as having his hands up. Others are characterizing as threatening to the officer involved. I don't know. I can't judge the video that well. But it was just a bad day to open up with headlines like that. Also in the headlines, the Chinese economy grew more than 18% in the first quarter. They've had just a great year in China after unleashing the virus on the rest of the world. I know there is no theory that it was intentional. There's a theory that it was an accidental release from the lab. There are other theories, but it definitely came from Wuhan. And a year later, their economy is 18% year-over-year growth. 18%. The rest of the world is reeling. In fact, Japan announced yesterday they may have to cancel the Olympics this summer as they had 4,000 new cases. And I was up in the middle of the night reading this book, Joby Warwick's Red Line. Joby's been on a couple of times. I think he's the best pure reporter in the world for complex war-related conflict stories, international. This is about Syria and its unraveling and America's race to destroy their chemical weapons. And I mean, they have tons and tons of sarin gas and VX nerve agent, and it's riveting. I actually woke up at 2 o'clock this morning, having gone to bed hours before, just thinking, I got to read one more chapter of that. It's so riveting. And you know what it all grows out of? It grows out of President Obama laying down a red line and not enforcing it. You have to enforce your red lines. We have a red line around Taiwan, and we ought to make it express that we will enforce. That was my subject in a column in the Washington Post yesterday, which drew very few comments relative, because it's not something about which the trolls, the Democratic Party trolls, get upset. I mean, some of the Chinese Communist Party trolls got upset. But I want you to hear it, and I want you to start thinking about it, because as I read Red Line, the bottom line for this president and future presidents is decisive action at the moment of crisis. You cannot twiddle your thumbs and hold meetings like President Obama did and then decide it's too complex and you can't act, because millions die as a result and chemical weapons get used. And we can't twiddle our thumbs. Joe Biden can't twiddle his thumbs on China. There is no way, as Japan considers closing off the Olympics next summer, I mean this summer, the games are supposed to begin in months, and they may have to cancel, that Beijing ought to get the Winter Games. They poisoned the world. They've killed millions because of their negligence. At a minimum, reckless indifference, possibly cold calculation after negligence. That, if the world suffers and we don't, maybe that's not such a bad deal for a communist regime. My column yesterday reads, we live in dangerous times, not only because of the pandemic, but also because of the threat of military aggression from the nation from which the virus sprang, and the Communist Party that covered up the lethal nature of the disease. And boy, did they cover it up. Reasonable people disagree on when the People's Republic of China and its leader Xi Jinping will move militarily against Taiwan, the democratic island nation 100 miles from the coast of the Chinese mainland. Some, like retired Admiral James Stavridis, believe that the lurch against Taiwan is a few years off. Others, like China hawk Senator Tom Cotton, believe it may follow China's Winter Olympics in early 2022. That's if they are not moved. I have Senator Rick Scott on later today to talk about that. Just as Vladimir Putin's annexation of Crimea followed the Sochi Games of 2014. But whenever the attack on Taiwan takes place. Aggression against Taiwan will pose the same dilemma to the West as Hitler's militarization of the Rhineland posed to allies in 1936. Western democracies blinked 85 years ago, and war engulfed the world shortly thereafter. Threat followed threat, demand followed demand, and the policy of appeasement of Germany failed. What happened next was a catastrophe, of course, World War II, 65 million dead. China's aggression has stepped up of late. Chinese aircraft have been testing Taiwan's air defenses for weeks. The next step is possibly an encounter at sea or a move against Taiwan's outer islands. Whatever the escalation, the United States and its allies will sooner or later face a sudden, inescapable choice: defend Taiwan or acquiesce. Just as Barack Obama faced a sudden, inescapable choice in Syria and he blinked. The United States is bound by a combination of the Taiwan Relations Act and presidential statements to defend Taiwan. But no one really knows what that means anymore. It should mean deploying U.S. troops and weaponry to assist Taipei in repelling any takeover attempt, meeting force with force. It also means working with allies now to form a visible and resolute coalition against Beijing's aggression across the Taiwan Strait and throughout the free seas of the region. Economic sanctions will not work, not against determined opponents of any sort, but especially not against Xi and his communist hardline allies in the PRC. Beijing has stepped up its rhetoric, too. Team Biden discovered that last month when Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan endured a 16-minute tongue-lashing by China's top diplomat at their Anchorage summit. Chinese Communist Party Foreign Affairs Chief Yang Jiexi's harangue followed a less aggressive statement from Blinken, about 2 minutes long, mentioning a half dozen U.S. objections to Chinese foreign and domestic policy. But Yang blistered the U.S. delegation with a broadside in response, publicly telling the world that days of Americans speaking to China in imperious tones were over. After Yang first knocked the United States for its own alleged human rights problems, he took off. Quote here, quote, "I think the problem is that the United States has exercised long-arm jurisdiction and suppression and overstretched the national security through the use of force or financial hegemony," Yang said, "and has created obstacles for normal trade activities, and the United States has also been persuading some countries to launch attacks on China." Ridiculous. Upon returning to D.C., the chastened U.S. team commenced shadowboxing. A U.S. official suggested to reporters that the United States might boycott the 2022 games. Then the State Department and the White House clarified quickly that's not being discussed. Now President Biden is sending an unofficial delegation to Taiwan of former officials, former Senator Chris Dodd, two former Deputy Secretaries of State, Richard Armitage, I have no idea why we're sending that guy, and James Steinberg. This is a tremulous message from a confused administration. While every American president, including the last one, embraced strategic ambiguity, some, like President Donald Trump, sent far more direct messages through administration figures. Trump had a series of speeches delivered by Mike Pence, the Vice President, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, Attorney General Barr, FBI Director Wray. All those messages were of a whole concerning a free Taiwan and getting tough on the Chinese communists. The United States now must wholly jettison the remnants of ambiguity after Yang's throwdown. The Biden administration has begun its relationship with Beijing on its back foot, I wrote, and needs to step up and do it soon. Amid these developments, the first budget from Biden actually cut defense spending in real terms. They tell you they raised it. No, they didn't, not in real terms. At a minimum, Congress must boost the Navy's top-line spending significantly if deterrence is going to hold. Having just spent $2 trillion on stimulus, it's absurd to call it COVID relief. They now want to spend trillions more on infrastructure, but nothing on defense. They ought to expand shipyards, build and repair submarines, new class of frigates more quickly, more money to modernize the naval leg of the nuclear triad. This confrontation can't be avoided, and it's up to Biden to very clearly communicate that the United States will meet force with force. It's a time for clarity. Its absence sends every signal the Chinese Communist Party needs. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll update you on more news of the morning when I return to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Of the great state of Florida, he's chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. Always welcome him. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
Good morning, buddy. Joe Biden's going to elect all of us. He's going to give us the greatest 22 ever if he just keeps it up.
He and Ed Markey. I want to start with Ed Markey. Your colleague went out and called for Biden getting 4 picks to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court is reactionary and broken. Can we get every Democrat on the record about Ed Markey's radical proposal?
Oh, it'll be pretty easy. I mean, whatever Chuck Schumer tells them to do, I mean, the Senate Democrats, all they do is, Chuck, what do you want us to do? We'll vote that way. I mean, look at the issues. These Democrat senators don't represent their state. Warnock clearly doesn't represent Georgia, and Hassan doesn't represent New Hampshire, and Cortez Masto and Bennett and Kelly, they don't represent their states. They represent New York. Oh, that's right. They vote to give more money to New York against their own state's best interest.
Well, I would like to see a list of how much money each city got, because Atlanta sure got screwed by Raphael Warnock, and I don't know what happened in New Hampshire. Quick update on that. Is Governor Sununu going to run against Maggie Hassan?
I hope so. The public stuff he said, he's not against it. And you look at the polls, Hassan's not doing well. So here's what I think. I think we're going to pick up Georgia against Warnock, doesn't represent the state. Kelly in Arizona. I think Cortez Masto is going to lose in Nevada. I think Hassan was going to lose in New Hampshire. I think we can beat Bennett. I mean, what's going to happen, I think, is people look at the Biden agenda. They say, wait a minute. We've got to change this. This is going to be like 2010, 2012, 2014, where we pick up seats because of Obama's agenda. Now, what I talk about every day is, do we want open borders? No. Do we want to shut down our schools? No. Do we want men playing in women's sports? No. Do we want to shut down the Keystone Pipeline? No. Do we want voter ID? Yes. And the Democrats are on the opposite side of all those issues, and I'm going to make sure every American knows about it.
I'm also wondering whether or not Senator Hassan and Senator Kelly are going to vote for the nominee for Associate Attorney General Gupta, who is as radical as they come. I mean, is Hassan and Kelly going to actually vote for Gupta?
Oh, of course they are, because Chuck Schumer tells them to. They don't have any independent thought there. It's just whatever Chuck Schumer tells them to do, that's what they do. I mean, Kelly in Arizona voted 3 times this year against border security in Arizona. Hassan voted against opening schools. Hassan voted for men playing in women's sports. They don't represent their states anymore. So if he says, oh, you got to vote for this nominee, they're going to say, oh, absolutely, Mr. Schumer, we'll do whatever you want. Forget our states. We don't represent our states anymore. We represent New York.
Now, we saw Nancy Pelosi come out and try and staunch the bleeding on court packing yesterday, which is why the Ed Markey tape matters to me a lot, Senator Scott. Is there any way to force a vote on court packing? Because I don't think Schumer will let that come to the floor. He's not stupid. He might be left-wing and radical, but he's not stupid, and America is revolted by the idea of touching the Supreme Court. I want to get Hassan. I want to get Kelly and Senator Warnock and Senator Cortez. I want them all on the record. Can you get a vote somehow?
Well, when they try to do, when they try to do another reconciliation, which looks like they're going to try it 2 more times, maybe with their infrastructure and their tax increase bill, then we'll have the ability to make them vote on anything. So that's when you have that, it's vote-a-rama. We can make the Democrats vote on anything and everything. I mean, they voted affirmatively. We got to give those stimulus checks to those murderers, pedophiles, and rapists. They did it. I mean, you can't make this stuff up how they're voting, because it doesn't represent their states. It doesn't represent this country.
Now, let me ask you about Bennett and Cortez Masto. You can't beat somebody, no matter how radical they are, unless you've got somebody who's a good candidate. Who do you got in the Centennial State of Colorado and down in the Silver State of Nevada? Who do you got?
We're having lots of conversations with people. What's happening is more and more people are saying, hey, I think I might get in because I see how bad this agenda is. So I think what's going to happen is, as this year goes on, we're going to see more people. I'm having a lot of conversations with people. I know the state parties are having a lot of conversation with people in those states and other states. But I think what you're going to see is all across this country, in all 34 states where we have senators up, Republicans are going to show up because they're going to say, hey, I've got a shot. Even in a state that appears to be, more further to the left than to the right. So I think we're going to see a lot of good people.
I don't endorse in primary, Senator, but I do point out weaknesses. And I think, I want to talk to you about Eric Greitens and Rory McCrory. Governor McCrory lost the last time when he ran for re-election, when every other person on the GOP side of the ticket won, and I think Eric Greitens is scandal-plagued and is the only guy in the only Republican in the hunt who can lose that race is Eric Greitens. Will you talk to them? Is this something you share with them, even if you do it privately?
Well, I tell people where they are. I tell people what they have to do to win, and I tell people what their weaknesses are. It's part of what I do. But look, my experience is the voters are pretty smart. The voters in those states say, look, I want to win, and they're going to pick candidates that can win the general election. I mean, if you have to remember, when I got in back in 2010, every Republican in the country had endorsed my opponent, but the voters said, wait, we want a business guy that has common sense, that wants to go change the direction of the state. I think the same thing is going to happen. We're going to hopefully have when we have open seats, we're going to have good primaries, and I think we're going to get good candidates.
Let's take a look at Georgia. I asked Karl Rove about Georgia the other day, and he loves Herschel Walker, but he said Herschel Walker is a Texan. And I've heard people say Doug Collins is the best nominee for that. Do you have an opinion on that? Is Herschel living in Texas a problem to his returning to Georgia? And do you have any notice from him of what he's going to do?
So if Herschel decides to run, he's got a lot of ties. He spends a lot of time in Georgia. My understanding, he still has a house in Georgia. And I think he would be a very good candidate. He really cares about this country, and he believes the way we believe. I think Doug Collins is also a very good candidate. He clearly is a hard worker, and he's a committed conservative. I think we're going to end up with a good primary. We've got other people that are going to get in. I think, I've talked to quite a few people, or at least talking about it. In the end, you'll see there's a lot of House members all across the country that are talking about getting in these seats, but they're not all going to get in. But I think we're going to have good, where we have open seats. We're going to have good primaries.
Now, I think I'm going to move back to Ohio and run in Ohio since there are 1,000 candidates. It's like the California recall. There are a lot. I mean, I've had 4 of them on already, and I think I got 4 more to go. What do you do in a situation like that? Well, you've got 4 great candidates already, and I mean that, with J.D. Vance and Steve Stivers and Jane Timken and Josh Mandel. I got no beef with any of them. They're all been on the show, and if more of them get in, the merrier. But honestly, I think I'll go back and win with 8% of the vote. Tim Ryan is going to be a good candidate. I know Tim. Tim and I went to the same high school. He's a friend of mine. He's wrong, but he's not rotten. He's going to be a good candidate. How do you stop a knife fight from bleeding the Republicans dry there?
Well, I think here's what's going to happen. I think ultimately it's going to be about the Biden agenda. And so while the primaries might be heated and tough, I think what's going to happen is there's going to be such angst against the Biden agenda. What my job is every day, and we do it every day. We don't waste a day. Every day we define who the Democrats are. And so every day we're talking about the border. Every day we're talking about schools. Every day we're talking about how the Democrats are voting. So what we're doing is everything that happens over on the Senate floor, we're making sure that people are talking about it in their states. We have 7 people over at the National Republican Senatorial Committee, and what they're doing is explaining, like for Ohio and Cleveland and in Columbus, hey, this is how these people are. This is how they're voting over in Ryan's case in the House. But we're telling people how they're voting every day and what their actions are, because ultimately that's what's going to be about. It's not going to be personality. It's going to be about politics. About policy.
But, Tim is not going to vote for that crazy court packing thing. I mean, he just won't, unless we get a discharge petition. He's just not dumb.
They can't lose. They can't lose, 3 votes? They can only lose 3 votes. So there's going to be a lot of pressure if they take the vote in the House for Tim and everybody else to vote exactly the way Pelosi tells them to. And, she's a bully just like Schumer is.
Okay, well, talk to me about a very practical matter. I hope you don't have to break his kneecaps, but I hope you persuade Doug Ducey to run against Mark Kelly. But they have that August primary, which is a nightmare. An August primary also exists in, I think, one of the other competitive states. Missouri is an August primary. And that means you bleed money all summer long. Can you get these? They're red legislatures. Can you get them to move their primary to a normal thing like June or May?
We have it in Florida the same way. After I won mine in 2010, the primary, it was a really hard primary. We only had 9 weeks to the general, so those are hard. I don't think they're gonna move them. Matter of fact, I think some states are gonna, because of redistricting, are gonna push them a little bit later. So it's just, but I think that's a problem. But I think that this is going to be about the Biden agenda, and it's going to be so bad. I mean, the country, look at the inflation. The country's not doing great right now. Look at inflation. Look at, the CPI. It's already up 2.6%. If you take the first quarter annualized, much higher. You look at gas prices are up, food prices are up, housing prices have skyrocketed. The Biden agenda of spending money like crazy and the Federal Reserve, continuing to buy up all the treasuries is not working. And I think the average person is going to say, wait, this, that's not what I voted for in 2020, and they're doing stuff that I don't believe in. So I think that's what the election is going to be about. In the primaries, it would be nice if they were earlier, but reality is it's going to be about their policy, and I'm going to make sure everybody knows the Democrats' policies.
Last question, Senator Scott. Alfredo Ortiz of the Job Creators Network, a friend of mine, we were talking this week about stepped-up basis. And I hate stepped-up basis because it destroys the 7-Eleven owner who has spent his life, it destroys family farms, it destroys family businesses left and right, from car washes to tree farms. It just is a destructive. And Alfredo said, don't call it stepped-up basis, call it a success tax, because that's why the Job Creators Network hates it. Are you going out after stepped-up basis? Call it a success tax.
Absolutely.
If you want. Call it the good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So here's the deal. They remember Joe Biden's big lie. He's had so many big lies so far, but one of them is, he says, I'm not going to raise taxes on anybody that makes less than $400,000. Well, by the way, he already did. In the so-called COVID bill, which was not COVID, they raised taxes on all the gig workers, the Uber drivers, the DoorDash, and all that. You look at their latest bill. Everybody's getting your taxes raised, basically, or they're going to kill your jobs by impacting our businesses. So yeah, we're talking about the taxes, but what they're doing is they're throwing out a whole bunch of trial balloons to see, which ones are they going to complain about the most? Okay, so we won't do those. So this is just an unbelievable power grab, raise your tax, big government, more debt spending by the Democrat Party.
Rick Scott, always a pleasure, Senator. Keep coming back monthly. Give us updates. Go out there and recruit. Go out there and deter. Go out there and encourage and raise money at nrsc.org. Thank you, Senator. Time for, how are you, Sonny?
I'm good, Hugh. You got it right. Across the movie aisle.
I know it takes a while, but I'm a slow learner. I have a recommendation and a question before I turn you loose, and a lament. The lament is that the Potomac Yard movie theater is being closed and redeveloped into Virginia Tech campus. The recommendation is that you read at least the first 200 pages of Karen Tumulty's book about Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan, called The Triumph of Nancy Reagan, because it's so doggone Hollywood. It's so much fun. And then the question, I have a viewing question: Billions or Succession? That's my choice between the next thing that I watch on streaming, which I have not watched either. What should I do, Billions or Succession?
Sure. So, first off, the Potomac Yards news, I had heard, and it's a little bit sad because I'm always sad to hear when theaters are closing, except for the fact that the Potomac Yards, I don't know if you've ever been to the Potomac
Yards. Oh, it's a horrible
theater.
place, but it was close enough for me to get to.
I mean, it's a real pit.
Yeah.
So, that's not the end of the world as far as movie theaters being closed goes. I still need to read Karen Tumulty's book. And I should definitely do that because, as you mentioned, there's a very strong Hollywood component. Billions versus Succession is an interesting question because I only watched the first episode of Succession, a show that I had heard really good things about because my wife was not into it at all. And I have found that I can only really afford to watch an entire television show if my wife is also into it, because it's,
this is true.
This is true.
This is true.
So she wasn't that into it. I guess I'd have to say Billions then, though I haven't watched Billions either because I don't have Showtime, which is what it's on.
You're not really much of a help on this question then.
Yeah,
so you've seen 1 hour of both shows and you're not going to see either of them.
I would suggest Succession, I think, just because there's less of it. It's shorter. My understanding is it's pretty funny too, but I don't know. I would if I were to choose one to watch by myself, it would be Succession. But again, I don't really have that.
Well, I caught up on Mandalorian, and while I am the Mandalorian of the radio, I was not impressed with season 2, and I'm glad it's over.
You didn't like season 2? See, I liked season 2. I thought it was really. I found it very entertaining. Just the way it was structured as kind of like the A-Team in Star Wars, where the guy is going town to town and righting wrongs, and there's a
little predictable. The last, I'm not giving no spoilers, not here, not now, not ever, but the last hour was great, and the rest of it mediocre. So what are you talking about this week, Sonny?
Well, we got a lot of stuff to talk about. I mean, there's a horror movie that you're probably not going to like, but I do want to mention briefly.
Go ahead.
It is in theaters, so that's one reason I want to mention it. But it's called In the Earth. It's by this director named Ben Wheatley. And the way I would describe it is the first great horror movie of the pandemic. It's set in Great Britain. It's about a guy who is going to study some phenomenon in the woods. But it takes place in the midst of a pandemic. It's not about COVID. They don't say, oh, COVID, blah, blah. But, he goes through all of these quarantine and lockdown protocols, right? He's getting sprayed down with misty decontamination, formulas, and he's giving blood tests, and then they're doing nasal swabs, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very much about the idea of purity in the forest and in nature, as opposed to, the contamination of the cities and all that. Except nature isn't really pure either. Nature has its own forms of wickedness and debasement and defilement. It is a very rough movie to watch in certain places. I would not recommend it for the weak of stomach or weak of heart. But it is an interesting little bit of elevated horror, as they like to call it, the genre of horror that is, a little fancier than slasher.
As I like to say, Sonny, not going to do it, wouldn't be prudent, not a chance. But anyway, you rank it highly among these kinds of movies.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for sure. It's definitely art housey, and it's a little bit artsy fartsy. I would say there's a lot of kind of weird editing. And
I was hoping you were going to tell me whether I should see Judas and the Black Messiah.
I've seen that. I mean, it was on HBO Max for a while. I don't think it still is. I think it's just
in theaters
now.
Yep.
So Judas and the Black Messiah is it's a movie about Fred Hampton and the FBI informant who betrayed him, the so-called the titular Judas and Black Messiahs. I didn't love it. But I did like it. I mean, I think Daniel Kaluuya is very, very good as Fred Hampton, and I liked Lakeith Stanfield as the guy who betrays him. So I don't know that it's great or anything, but it's entertaining enough. It is one of the Best Picture nominees. So if you want to see,
that's why I'm going to go see it.
Nominees, you should check it out. I don't think it's the best movie of the year for sure, and of the nominees. Of the nominated films, again, the one that I liked the most was The Father, which I talked about last week.
Can't find that anywhere near me. Can't find The Father. I'd go see it. I like Anthony Hopkins a lot.
Yeah, it was only playing in one theater near me, and that theater was like 20 miles from me, so it wasn't even that near. But it is on demand. So if you want to watch it on TV at home, you can do it that way.
What else you got for us? I mean, it's the weekend, Sonny.
All right, so I have a Netflix recommendation, a minor Netflix recommendation. This isn't a movie or a show that I loved, but it was entertaining enough. It was fine. I was able to watch it and enjoy it. It's called This Is a Robbery: The World's Greatest Art Heist, and it is about the 1990 theft of 13 classic works of art at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. It's a real story.
Yeah, I know this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real story. It's about, so one night in 1990, two guys dressed up as cops broke into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, stuck up the guards, locked them down in the basement, and then made off with 13 paintings, including a Rembrandt, a priceless Rembrandt, his only seascape, Jesus on the Sea of Galilee, or Christ on the Sea of Galilee. I forget what exactly it was called. But and a bunch of other, rare arts that was part of the collection there. The show is 4 episodes long. Each episode's about 45, 50 minutes. which means that, like every other Netflix thing, it's probably about 45 or 50 minutes too long. It could have been trimmed down in places, but it's got an interesting cast of characters. Like there's this one guy, this art thief, who lived in Boston, who swears he had nothing to do with the robbery and was actually in prison at the time of the robbery. But the show seems to think he deserves to be a serious suspect, or kind of a liaison with the Italian mob. I mean, this is the big thesis of this program, is that it was either the Irish mob or the Italian mob, and the Irish mob seems not to really have had anything to do with it, and the Italian mob comes in for most of the scrutiny. So,
well, I like this idea. It's on my list below the Chicago 7 for Netflix stuff. I haven't watched that one yet either.
It's fine. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's the greatest show I've ever seen. Again, it's a little bit long. It drags out in places. It runs down some blind alleys. Like all of these things, it's just a little bit too long. But it's fine. It's entertaining, and if you're looking to kill some time this weekend, you could do worse than watching that, for sure.
All right. I don't know if it's going to rain in Virginia. It seems like it's rained every day since I got back. So I'm back my lean-to is flooded, and it's terrible. The studio's swampy, but.
Yeah, well, it's raining here in Dallas too. Interestingly,
did you ever move to Austin for even like a cup of coffee?
I have been to Austin. I didn't move to Austin. No,
I was just reading a real estate story about Austin, and it's the craziest housing market in America right now for some reason.
Yeah, it's like San Francisco at the height of the tech boom right now, because everybody's trying to move from San Francisco to Austin.
Or Nashville or Alexandria. You like Dallas? Yeah. Dallas is booming too. So you got time for one more recommendation, or just
one more recommendation? Yes, absolutely. So Mythic Quest, which I have talked about before, it's a sitcom on Apple TV Plus by the guys who made Always Sunny in Philadelphia, who still make Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Mythic Quest is a show about a computer company, actually a video game company. They make a massively multiplayer online role-playing game called Mythic Quest. It's just a funny workplace comedy. It's very
okay. Now I got a question for you.
I'm sorry. It's got a new episode. It's coming back. Second season starts in 2 weeks. There's a special episode, new dropping today on Apple TV Plus. So if you have Apple TV Plus, go watch the new episode of Mythic Quest.
All right, now my question. I was also recommended and got about 20 minutes into it and said, not for me. The Boys. And I don't even get the premise of The Boys. I just thought, nah, this is not a superhero thing. What'd you think?
Well, The Boys is a parody of superhero movies and TV shows. I mean, The Boys is a very dark look at what it would be like for superheroes to be real in the real world. So it is not for the faint of heart. The Superman character is is essentially a crazy fascist going around murdering people, and all of the other characters.
I got as far the Aquamarine guy is a sexual Me Too walking nightmare. I said, I don't need any of this. But then I saw HBO run an ad for superheroes in Victorian garb. I thought, well, that's an interesting combination of two genres.
Yeah, that's the Nevers, which was created by Joss Whedon. Speaking of walking Me Too cases, that was created by Joss Whedon and is on HBO now. I believe the first episode premiered last week. I have not watched that yet. I'm trying to decide if I want to spend the time to get into it. I probably should. I'm sure.
I like Victorian stuff. I read Victorian history. I know the Victorian prime minister, so I will watch that. I will give it a shot at least. So I'm looking forward to hearing what they say about it across the movie aisle. Do you do streaming on Across the Movie Aisle?
We do sometimes, especially since there's been kind of a lack of options in the movie theaters.
All right, well, everyone, go and subscribe to and comment upon Sonny Bunch and his gang at the Across the Movie Aisle. I've remembered it now, so now I want to say Across the Movie Aisle 7 times so you remember Across the Movie Aisle, as well as the interview with Hugh Hewitt, which you should subscribe to and comment on. Those are the two podcasts that you ought to listen to whenever they drop, and I drop mine more often than Sonny drops his. Across the Movie Aisle. Sonny Bunch, thank you. At Twitter, at Sonny